I'm Eddie Muller, and this week we've got a red light blazing in Noir Alley. But if you think you're getting a vintage Hollywood take on the world's oldest profession, cool your jets, Roxanne. What we've got here is Red Light, a revenge yarn released by United Artists in 1949, which is goosed almost to greatness by its fabulous visual style. But before getting into that, let me ask a question. Among the great stars of the Golden Age, was there a worse actor than George Raft? I'm not saying he didn't have presence and a hard-edged charisma, and there's no question he was a hell of a dancer. But when it came to expressing emotion, Raft ran the gamut from A to A. He shot to fame in 1932's Scarface, where his stoic aplomb and coin-flipping finesse was a tonic to Paul Muni's hyperactive style. Raft was a popular product of the time, his portrayals of flashy gangsters and hard-bitten working men striking a chord with Depression-era audiences who looked to tough guys like Raft, Cagney, and Robinson for tips on style and survival. But for Raft, surviving the 40s was a tougher bargain. He lost out on some major roles, The Maltese Falcon, Double Indemnity, and Casablanca, and found himself treading water in a stream of nervous A's, things like Johnny Angel, Nocturne, Intrigue, and Race Street. He still had enough juice, and underworld associates you did not want to cross, that he could demand his own personal director. Typically, that was Edwin L. Marin, a craftsman of no discernible distinction. None of those pictures I just mentioned, all directed by Ed Marin, are flat out bad, but they're all less than they could have been with a little bit more inspiration and effort. Which brings us to Red Light. In my opinion, far and away the best movie on Raft's 40s resume. One big reason, it's not directed by Edwin L. Marin. This one's the handiwork of Hollywood warhorse Roy Del Ruth, a guy who could pull rank on Raft and demand that little bit more. He'd made dozens of good movies for Warner Brothers in the 30s, including the terrific Jimmy Cagney, Joan Blondell picture Blonde Crazy, the first version of The Maltese Falcon in 1931, The Little Giant with Edward G. Robinson, and one of Raft's better early efforts, It Had to Happen. Del Ruth was so reliable that by the end of the 30s, he was one of the highest paid directors in the business. After a series of for-hire assignments during the war years, the director set out on his own, forming Roy Del Ruth Productions. 1947's It Happened on Fifth Avenue was a pleasant enough comedy on which the director's name appeared above the title for the first time, a la Frank Capra, John Ford, and William Wyler. But his next film, 1948's The Babe Ruth Story, was a disaster. Some reviewers branded it one of the worst movies ever made. Perhaps in desperation, Del Ruth retreated to the genre that had served him well in the 30s, crime. The final film of short-lived Roy Del Ruth Productions was Red Light, the director's lone venture in the world of film noir, which is too bad because he clearly had a ball making this, pulling out all the stylistic stops. He orchestrates things like he's suddenly 20 years younger. Now, much of the credit goes to cinematographer Burt Glennon. He'd been around since the silent days and was a favorite cameraman for Ford, DeMille, and Joseph von Sternberg, for whom he shot the visually stunning Underworld, Blonde Venus, and Scarlet Empress. He became a director himself in the 20s, but discovered he preferred staying behind the camera to sitting in the director's hot seat. In Red Light, Glennon returned to the kind of nocturnal dream world he'd created with von Sternberg. Some sequences are as boldly photographed as anything in noir. Glennon particularly relished casting hard shadows on a pair of mugs familiar to noir fans, Raymond Burr and Henry Morgan. Glennon passed his talent on to his son Jim Glennon, who worked with writer-director Alexander Payne on 3 of his early films. He was also the DP for the popular show Deadwood. Now, if you skipped church today to watch Noir Alley, don't feel guilty. In fact, Jesus forgives you. because this film contains so much religious allegory, it could qualify as biblical noir. From 1949, high watermark in Hollywood's flood of classic crime films, here's Red Light.